The day Thomas Walker came back into my life, I was standing in the doorway of my childhood home with a folder of paperwork in my hands, preparing to sell the one place I thought I had already said goodbye to. I was expecting a property inspector. I was expecting measurements, questions about the foundation, and a polite conversation about repairs before the house went on the market. I was not expecting to see the man I had loved when I was 20 years old, standing on my front porch after 40 years of silence. For a moment, neither of us spoke, because some people leave your life so completely that your mind creates a version of them that never changes, and when they suddenly appear again, standing right in front of you, you have to decide whether you are looking at a memory or a person who is still capable of changing your future. My name is Clara Bennett. I was 67 years old when Thomas Walker came back. I had spent most of my adult life being practical. I was the woman people called when they needed advice, when they needed someone to organize a difficult situation, or when they simply needed someone calm enough to listen. For 30 years, I was an elementary school principal. I learned how to handle worried parents, difficult conversations, unexpected problems, and the 1,000 little emergencies that come with caring for other people. After retirement, I moved back and forth between Charleston and my childhood home whenever I needed a quiet place to think. That house held every version of me. The little girl who ran through the backyard barefoot, the young woman who sat on the front steps dreaming about the future, the wife and mother who eventually built a completely different life, and the woman I became after losing my husband 6 years earlier. My husband was a good man, a kind man. We had a marriage filled with respect, family, and memories I will always treasure. But after he passed away, I learned something many people never talk about. Grief is not only missing someone. Sometimes grief is discovering how much of yourself disappeared while you were busy taking care of everyone else. For years, I told myself I was content. And in many ways, I was. But content and fulfilled are not always the same thing. Selling my childhood home was supposed to be a practical decision. The house was too much responsibility. The repairs were becoming expensive. My children lived in different states, and although they loved the memories connected to it, neither of them wanted the burden of maintaining an old property. So I made the decision. I would let it go. I thought closing that door would simply mean moving forward. I did not know someone from my past was about to open it again. When I saw Thomas standing there, older than the young man I remembered, but still carrying the same calm expression that once made me feel like the entire world had slowed down, I forgot every prepared sentence I had in my mind. He had changed. Of course he had. 40 years changes everyone. His hair was silver now. His face carried the lines of a life fully lived. He looked stronger in a quieter way, like someone who had experienced enough disappointment to stop pretending everything was easy. But his eyes were the same, those blue-gray eyes that had looked at me when I was 20 and made me believe I was the only person in the room. "Clara," he said softly. "Just my name. Nothing dramatic. Nothing rehearsed." But hearing him say it after all those years felt like opening a book I thought had been lost forever. "Thomas?" That was all I managed. He gave a small smile. I suppose I should have called first. I almost laughed because it was such a Thomas thing to say. Even after 40 years, he was still the kind of person who worried about being inconvenient. "I wasn't expecting you," I told him. "I know." He looked toward the house. "I'm here about the restoration evaluation." And that was when reality came rushing back. The house. The sale. The reason he was standing in front of me. Thomas explained that the company handling the evaluation had hired him because of his experience restoring historic homes. After retiring from architecture, he had spent years preserving older properties. Of all the people who could have been sent to look at my childhood home, it had to be him. I invited him inside because not inviting him inside would have been ridiculous. At least that is what I told myself. The truth was, a part of me wanted to understand why he was there. Why now? Why after 40 years? The house felt different with him walking through it. Not because anything had changed, because he remembered everything. He noticed the old staircase where I had slipped as a child. He remembered the window in the kitchen where we used to sit during summer evenings. He even remembered the small garden behind the house where I once told him I wanted to become a teacher. I had forgotten that conversation. He had not. "You still tap your fingers when you're thinking," he said while examining the old wooden cabinets. I looked at him. "What?" He smiled. "You used to do that in college whenever you were trying to decide whether someone was telling the truth." I stared at him because I had not even realized I still did it. That was 40 years ago. I know. The way he said it was not sad. It was almost an acknowledgement. Yes, 40 years had passed. But some things had survived. Over the next few days, Thomas worked through the house inspection while I continued preparing everything for the sale. At first, we were careful. Almost too careful. We talked about the roof, the floors, the repairs. We avoided the one subject standing between us, the past. But memories have a way of appearing when you least expect them. A photograph tucked inside an old drawer. A mark on a doorway showing where I measured my height as a child. A corner of the garden where we once planted flowers together. Every room seemed to ask a question neither of us wanted to answer. What happened to us? The truth was, Thomas and I had not simply broken up. We had lost each other. When we were 20, we were certain we knew exactly what our future would look like. We talked about marriage, about traveling, about building a life together. Then one decision changed everything. And instead of fighting for each other, we both allowed pride and circumstances to create distance. I had spent decades believing Thomas walked away because he stopped choosing me. Seeing him again forced me to question everything I thought I knew. One afternoon, while reviewing restoration notes at the kitchen table, he looked at me and said something that made it impossible to keep pretending we were just two old acquaintances. "I almost came back years ago." I looked up. "What?" He lowered the papers in his hand. "There were so many times I thought about finding you. My first instinct was to protect myself, to dismiss it, to tell him that 40 years was too long and some things should stay buried. But I stayed quiet, because some part of me needed to hear the answer. "Why didn't you?" I asked. Thomas looked toward the window. "Because I thought you had the life you wanted." That answer surprised me, because it was not the answer I expected. I expected excuses. I expected something that would make it easier to be angry. Instead, I saw regret. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind people carry when they have replayed the same moment in their mind for years. And for the first time since he arrived, I wondered if maybe the story I had been telling myself about our past was incomplete. Maybe I had been protecting myself with a version of events that hurt less. But before I could ask him more, he stood up and walked toward the hallway. "Clara," he said. There was hesitation in his voice. "There's something in this house you should see." And somehow, after 40 years, I found myself following the man I once loved toward a part of my past I had completely forgotten. Sometimes, the stories that stay with us the longest are the ones about love we thought was already gone. That is why I wrote Confession of Unexpected Love. It is a collection of emotional stories about second chances, unexpected connections, and the moments that remind us that our hearts can still be surprised. If you enjoy stories like this, you can find the book through the link in the pinned comment. Now, let me tell you what happened when I finally discovered why he came back after 40 years. He led me down the hallway toward the old bedroom at the back of the house. It was a room I had not opened in months. Not because there was anything frightening inside, because there were memories. Thomas stopped in front of a small wooden door that had always been difficult to open. The paint around the frame had chipped over the years, and the handle still needed to be turned a certain way before it would move. He looked at me. "You remember this?" I smiled despite myself. Of course I remember. That door had always been stubborn, just like both of us had been. When it finally opened, I saw a small storage space filled with old boxes, forgotten furniture, and things my family had collected over generations. Thomas moved carefully through the room until he found what he was looking for, a small wooden box. He handed it to me. I found this when I was checking the house. I opened it slowly. Inside were old photographs, handwritten notes, and letters. Letters I had written when I was 20 years old. Letters I thought were gone forever. I looked at Thomas. "How did you have these?" He sat down on the edge of the old chair. "Because you gave them to me." I shook my head. "I never gave you those." His expression changed slightly. Not sadness, something closer to understanding. "Clara, you did." And then he reminded me of something I had completely forgotten. When we were young, before everything fell apart, I had asked him to keep my letters safe because I was afraid my parents would find them. I had forgotten about that. But Thomas had not. For 40 years, he had carried pieces of a life we never finished. I held one of those letters in my hand, but I did not open it. Not yet. Because suddenly the past felt too close. "Why did you keep them?" I asked. Thomas looked at the floor for a moment. "Because I never stopped caring about the person who wrote them." That sentence stayed with me, not because it was a grand declaration, because it was simple. Thomas was not trying to convince me that we were still 20. He was not pretending that 40 years had disappeared. He was standing there as a 69-year-old man who had lived an entire life and was brave enough to admit that one part of it had always remained unfinished. That night, I opened the letters alone. And reading my own words from decades earlier was a strange experience. I saw a young woman who believed love could solve everything, a woman who was hopeful, fearless, and certain. But I also saw something else. I saw someone who had spent years believing she lost the only chance she would ever have, and maybe that was the part that hurt the most. Not losing Thomas, believing that version of myself was gone forever. The next morning, Thomas and I walked through the garden behind the house. It was overgrown now. The flowers we planted together had long disappeared, but he remembered exactly where they had been. "You always wanted this place to be beautiful," he said. I was 20. He smiled. "You were 20, and you were already trying to make everything around you better." I laughed. "You make me sound exhausting." "No," he said. "I make you sound like Clara." And somehow that meant more than any compliment, because for most of my life, people had known what I did. They knew I was a teacher, a mother, a wife, a principal, the person who organized things, the person who helped. But Thomas remembered who I was before I became responsible for everyone else. And that was both comforting and terrifying. Because being remembered means allowing yourself to be seen. As the restoration continued, I found myself looking forward to his visits, not because I was trying to recreate the past. I knew better than that. The young man I loved was gone. And honestly, so was the young woman he loved. We were different people now, but maybe that was the point. The question was never whether we could go backward. The question was whether we could move forward. Together. One afternoon, while we were sitting on the porch reviewing the restoration plans, Thomas finally told me the truth about why we separated, the truth I had waited 40 years to hear. When he left, it was not because he stopped loving me. He believed he was holding me back. I had been accepted into a teaching program that required me to move away. Thomas had been struggling financially, trying to help his family, and he convinced himself that asking me to wait for him would be selfish. So instead of fighting together, he made the decision for both of us, and I did the same thing. I assumed he chose a different life because he no longer wanted ours. We were two young people who loved each other and were too afraid to admit how much we needed each other. "I should have come back," he said quietly. I looked at him. "Yes." He nodded. I know. There was no excuse, no dramatic explanation. Just two older people finally being honest about a mistake that had shaped their lives. But honesty did not erase everything, because there was another truth I had to face. My husband, the life we built, the memories we created. For weeks, I struggled with the idea that opening my heart to Thomas somehow meant betraying the life I had already lived. I finally told him that. And Thomas surprised me. He did not tell me to forget the past. He did not tell me that what we had was more important. He simply said, "Clara, loving someone new does not erase loving someone before." That was the moment something changed for me, because he was right. I had been treating love like there was a limited amount, as if making room for a new chapter meant disrespecting the old one. But maybe life did not work that way. Maybe the heart was not a room where one person had to leave before another could enter. The biggest decision, however, was still waiting for me. The buyer for the house made an offer, a very generous offer, the kind of offer that would have made the practical decision easy. Sell the house. Move somewhere smaller. Start a simpler life. That was the plan. But standing there in the middle of the home where so many versions of myself had existed, I realized I was not really deciding whether to sell a building. I was deciding whether I wanted to keep running away from the parts of myself that still had dreams. Thomas never asked me to stay. That mattered. He did not stand there and tell me what choice to make. He simply said, "Whatever you choose, Clara, I hope it is a choice you make because it brings you peace." And that was exactly why I knew what I wanted. For the first time in a very long time, I was not making a decision because it was expected. I was not choosing the safest option. I was choosing something because it mattered to me. I turned down the offer, but I did not keep the house because I wanted to live in the past. I kept it because I wanted to create something new. With Thomas's experience restoring old homes and my years of building communities, we decided to transform part of the property into a small gathering place for local history, education, and memories. A place where people could share stories. A place where old things could become meaningful again. A place that reflected who we were now, not who we were 40 years ago. Months later, Thomas and I sat together on the restored porch as the sun went down over the trees. The house looked different, not because it had become new, because it had been cared for. And maybe that was true for people too. Maybe we were not meant to erase the cracks, the losses, or the years that changed us. Maybe we were meant to honor them. Thomas looked at me and smiled. "You know, I always thought I missed my chance." I looked out at the garden we had rebuilt. "And did you?" He reached for my hand. No, and neither did I, because I was not 20 anymore. I did not need a perfect beginning. I did not need someone to complete my story. I had already lived a full life. But sitting there beside the man who once knew my dreams before anyone else did, I realized something I had forgotten. A chapter ending does not mean the book is finished. And sometimes, the most unexpected pages are the ones you were never brave enough to imagine. Before I finish sharing my story with you, I want to share something special. If this story reminded you of the beauty of second chances, unexpected connections, and the feelings we sometimes think we have left behind, I believe you will enjoy my book, Confession of Unexpected Love. It was created for those quiet moments when we want to slow down and escape into a meaningful story. A perfect companion for a peaceful weekend at home, a relaxing evening after a long day, a journey or vacation when you want something heartfelt to read, or those special moments when you simply want to reconnect with stories about love, hope, and possibility. You can find Confession of Unexpected Love through the link in the pinned comment. Thank you for spending this time with me. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving this video a like, and sharing it with someone who enjoys meaningful love stories. Also, turn on notifications so you never miss our next story of unexpected love, second chances, and the moments that remind us life can still surprise us.